We are live, and I'm doing yet another update on Canada's Bill C-11. I've been streaming to Odyssey. There is another issue. I cannot buy library tokens, so I can't fund my own account. If there's anybody that comes on, I guess in the chat here, I'll ask them if they can send me some library tokens. I want to make sure I'm above the 50 total for Odyssey, but every time I try to buy library tokens, it tells me it's not available. I know there's possible other avenues, swapping. There might be some swaps I can do on certain exchanges and stuff like that. I guess I can look into that, but I'd rather just wait until Odyssey got their link on their site, directly on their site to work. That is just one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is I'm trying to get at least one of my live streams on Odyssey to go live. And then I can verify if it's because I don't have 50 or more library credits, but I believe they got rid of all of that because they've allowed me to stream so far. They have an archiving system where you need to set the stream. It's really not, there is definitely some ambiguity in it. You basically go live, you create a placeholder for a live stream for you to stream to, and then you go live and you stream to Odyssey. Then your stream will end. You'll end your stream in OBS, but then you got to go back into Odyssey. Nothing is automated for you really at all. You got to go back into Odyssey after the stream's over and somehow save it, and then it will show up in your Odyssey account. I've not gotten to that point, so trying to figure that out, and that's why we're doing another update on Bill C-11, because I definitely want to get Canada's most restrictive streaming and media censorship bill ever devised by politicians. Not only will this have big effects for independent streamers, but, and I don't think most people care, but it will affect the very big streaming platforms like Netflix and Facebook. It's just, it's bad all around for everybody. Obviously, the main concern is independent content creators, as they have the least amount of power to fight all of this. Taking a look at openmedia.org. I did cover this on a past stream. We're going to go over it real quick. I'm getting hit with a ton of Discord notifications. Just give me a second here. I'm going to get this into the chat. Got the openmedia.org link in the chat. This one has a FAQ concerning Bill C-11 that's pretty good, pretty comprehensive. It goes over not only Bill C-11, but C-10, which preceded it. C-10 ran out of steam. There was some controversy over C-11, which was the basis for C-11. I mean, there was some controversy for Bill C-10, which became the basis for C-11, but from what I looked up, Parliament in Canada, the time ran out. There was a time stipulation of some kind. The bill didn't get approved, so it got wiped from the record, I guess. So they had to create Bill C-11. That must have pissed them off, because then they created Bill C-11, which is even more extreme compared to Bill C-10. Extremely comprehensive. It covers everything: internet, radio, TV. Obviously, I think for most people, all they really care about is online. You know, cable TV is dying. It's pretty much dead. Yeah, there may be some demographics there where they might have a stronghold, but it's pretty much dead. Everything is online now. Everything is Netflix or YouTube or all these independent streaming platforms like DLive and the biggest of them all, YouTube. And content creators are, uploading content to these platforms all the time. And in theory, Bill C-11 can affect those streamers. So the basics of Bill C-11, according to the article here, is Bill C-11, also known as the Online Streaming Act, is the updated version of Bill C-10, first introduced last year by former Canadian Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault, now spearheaded by current Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez. Under Bill C-11 expands the Broadcasting Act that grants the CRTC regulatory powers over radio and television to cover all audiovisual content on the internet, including content on platforms like SickTalk, aka TikTok, SnoozeTube, aka YouTube, Spotify, and I have not come up with a nickname for Spotify, so we're just gonna have to leave it at that. And podcast clients. Under Bill C-11, all platforms hosting audiovisual content that are not specifically excluded must make financial contributions to producing official recognized CanCon. You heard it there correctly. You got to make CanCon, currently defined by a 1980s era point system built around legacy media, broadcast media. Legacies, that's right. A 1980 era point system built around legacy media, broadcast media. Isn't that a little redundant? Let's check this out. I want to check this. I don't know what this link is about. Does it go back to the 1980s? So I guess this has been, it was dreamed up in the 1970s and it kind of made some kind of headway in the 80s. Everything you need to know about CanCon. This is important, people. I know you might not think it's important, but CanCon content is, Canadian content is very important. And with C-11, you will be forced to create government-approved canned content. So if you're confused what canned content is, CanCon, the government will let you know exactly what they mean. It was dreamed up in the 1970s to boost the success of Canadian cultural content, baby. At the time, space on the airwaves was scarce, was only a set amount of airtime available each week. The easiest and cheapest way for broadcasters to fill their content schedule was rebroadcasting popular content made in other countries, crowding out original content from Canadian creators, defining what counted as CanCon, and forcing broadcasters to carry content that qualified was a way for the government to push back. In the age of the internet, however, these conditions look very different. Online, the airwaves are unlimited. There is no online broadcast schedule forcing Canadian productions to jockey for a spot. Popular Canadian English and French content can and does flourish online without help, both domestically and even internationally. Take Schitt's Creek, for example. Of course, that's not to say we've outgrown the need for policy supporting Canadian cultural content, but if the CanCon system is here to stay in today's online world, we need to fundamentally reshape that system and its definitions to make sense for the internet. Not copy-paste the same 70-era rules designed for radio and cable TV. I'm not Canadian. Thankfully, do not live under Canadian law. But I don't see the point in any kind of CanCon policy. I don't understand why you need to have one. People should just be, independent creators in Canada should just be allowed to upload whatever they want. Not some of this crazy-ass Orwellian CanCon madness. Right now, Canadian broadcasters are required to have between 50 to 60% of their yearly programming meet CanCon strict hour standards. For example, in order for something to qualify as a CanCon TV show, the producer must be Canadian and also has to be responsible for monitoring and decision-making. Either the director or screenwriter must be Canadian, at least one of the two lead performers must be Canadian. You know, this sounds an awful lot like what they're doing in the United States. For people that are, say, of ethnicities outside of Caucasian, outside of maybe male Caucasian, for people that have what some may see as gender dysphoria, but some people that are not comfortable with the gender that a doctor assigned to them, so they come up with a new gender, and all of that should be allowed in Hollywood and other places, and we need diversity. Do you see where this goes when you start forcing people's hands in this way, and you create, and the government creates the regulations around it, and you're forced to do it? It's really not a good idea. I'm sorry. I'm not a Canuck. I am trying to get back into Canada. I am not vaccinated, but I feel that I am free. But I don't want to go into Canada and then get arrested because I'm not vaccinated. So I'm looking at a window. There may be a window that pops up. I know it's maybe too optimistic for me, but if the window does pop up and I can get into a Canada without being vaccinated, I am going to jump on it probably pretty hard because I'm not that far from the border. I want to understand how a country could create something like CanCon. So I want to go to Canada and I want to experience it in the real. Of course, I'll be streaming it live, but we'll be there physically if it all comes together. Anyway, we're going to go back to the Open Media article that just focuses strictly on C-11. We did a little bit of history on CanCon. It was extremely disturbing, but we must move on in life, even though we may be deeply disturbed by what the government does. So another out of the what is Bill C-11 section. Under Bill C-11, platforms must also make CanCon discoverable by filling our feeds and search results with a mandatory quota of official CanCon content or face stiff financial penalties from the CRTC. CanCon support currently largely excludes small and digital-first Canadian content creators. While Bill C-11 instructs the CRTC to review CanCon definitions, there is a little guidance on how to do so and no certainty for when it will complete its review or whether digital creators will be appropriately included in future support. All right, so if I'm reading that correctly, if you're a small-time independent creator, a digital-first Canadian content creator that's also small, CanCon largely excludes that. So maybe you're all right in this beginning phase if it were to pass, if C-11 were to pass, but it says here in this language that you may be lumped in eventually into supporting CanCon and all this stuff in Bill C-11. So that's not something I would want to have pass in my country. I'm sure if it does pass, there'll be whack job politicians in the United States that want to create something similar because that, it just gives them more regulations to create, gives them more power. But none of this is needed. Does Bill C-11 exclude your posts from CRTC's regulatory control, despite efforts to clean Bill C-11 up compared to 2021's disastrous Bill C-10? The short answer is no. How this Bill C-11 passed the House is beyond me in Canada. But it is in the Senate right now, and in theory could come very close to being approved. Let me just do a quick search in another browser. Does Prime Minister have to approve? All right, I'm just going to read a little bit from Canadian. This is rcommons.ca. So it's a Canadian domain site with a Canadian domain. Blah, blah, blah. Legislative process, types of bills. There's public, there's private, there's government bills, private member bills. I'm probably going to come back to this link. This is just like a rabbit hole. I just posted that our commons.ca link. It's got an overview of how the Canadian government works. I'm going to go back to that later, but I don't think it's completely goes right into law if the Senate approves it. I think there's some kind of process after that. Might be multiple process, but I'm going to look into that. And it also depends on the type of bill. Same thing goes in the U.S. Like certain types of bills, they have a different approval process. It really does depend on the type, what type the bill is, and what its approval process is. Finishing up, Bill C-11 does Bill C-11 exclude your post from CRTC's regulatory control? So the short answer is no. And like Bill C-11, Bill C-10, Bill C-11 gives the CRTC unprecedented regulatory authority to monitor all online audiovisual content. This power extends to penalizing content creators and platforms, and through them, content creators that fail to comply. So that makes it sound like it's all-encompassing. Up here, I was talking about CanCon. Independent small-time streamers may not have to adhere to CanCon content if this bill to pass, but as far as you posting any content, according to this, Bill C-11 has full control over anything, radio, TV, or online. In Bill C-11, Section 4.1 establishes a limited exception from regulation for some types of online audiovisual content, but they make that ambiguous. How will Bill C-11 affect the content I see? You'll see less of the content you want most. According to the government, Bill C-11 will increase visibility for some officially recognized Canadian content creators. But their tool for doing this is manipulating our playlist feeds and algorithmic recommendation. This means that the CRTC will be picking winners and losers, forcing some officially recognized content up in feeds and recommendations while down ranking or hiding other content we'd otherwise receive. Global content and content that best fits your search criteria as a platform's algorithm understands it will become harder to find. The content you want to see that doesn't fit the CRTC's vision of CanCon is pushed down. Now, this is going to affect people that are kind of like, that, you know, this is how I see if it does pass, how the government's going to do it. They're going to go to big platforms like Facebook and Google and demand that they promote this CanCon content. This logistically sounds like a complete nightmare. These large Facebook, you know, they'll adhere to what these governments say, especially in the United States, because it's, you know, one of the biggest markets. But it still costs money for these companies to implement all this, and these large companies, they never like spending any money, and they definitely don't like being told what to do. So I don't even know if the Canadian government would get them to do it. It's possible. But Canada's percentage of internet users is not as big, say, as China. All these big corporations are all dying to get into China because they've got what? It could be anywhere from like 300 to 500 million people with access to the internet. Okay, that's bigger than the entire population of the United States. Apple, look at Apple, spent over 150, 170 billion. It was some insane amount Apple spent bribing the CCP and paying for access to get inside China, paying for it in the billions, the multi-billions. Will these big if the C-11 passes, are these big corporations it just sounds logistically like a nightmare. And what about people that don't get their news from these big platforms where that's the easiest way to be gatekeeper? It would take the Canadian government a long time to build out this system of censorship and content filtering. It's not something you can do overnight. And if I were Canadian, if you're not doing it already, I'd be looking into it right now. VPN access and SOCKS 5. I think a lot of people, they don't realize that a SOCKS 5 proxy is probably your best bet, even better than a VPN. I've been using SOCKS 5 a lot now. I used to use it back in the day. I've come back to it. I was getting more into VPNs, but you know, I looked at all the overhead of a VPN and all that, and it's just, I'm still going to use them. Still going to look into expanding them, try to build communities around them, but SOCKS 5 is the fastest way to get up and running. And you could put like 4 or 5 people on the same SOCKS as long as nobody's a bandwidth hog, and you'd be all right. and it forwards your DNS, your domain name. So every time you're looking up a site or whatever, those don't leak through. You got to configure it so those don't leak to your ISP, and you've got a pretty good solid connection. Just use something outside of Canadian borders. But if bills like C-11 pass, because this is just be the first phase of their censorship bills, you could have a C-12 and a C-13 or whatever come after this and become even more restrictive. That's why it's important that this bill does not pass. How will Bill C-11 affect small and digital-first Canadian creators? Many small digital creators may be regulated as producing broadcast content. C-11 attempts to distinguish between professional and amateur content based on an unspecified quota for how much money a creator makes, how much money creators generate from a certain platform, what kind of brand deal creators are involved in, etc. So they're looking at the bottom line, the financial bottom line with these creators. Sounds like they're going to go after any creator that's making money. So you could get around it, maybe. Maybe in this first phase, if you're not making money, but be unwise to think they're not coming for all independent creators eventually. The new CanCon requirements will make it nearly impossible for independent creators to benefit from any financial or promotional gain from CanCon. Wow. Rather than having diverse voices on the internet, C-11 would penalize the success that creators generate. Many independent creators post on multiple channels to enhance their discoverability and showcase their work to different demographic bases. This common practice would subject content creators to C-11 regulation. If their content does not meet the CanCon requirements, their overall discoverability is affected on all channels they use for their work. So this brings up an important point. There's a guy, some ordinary gamer or whatever. I've been watching him on YouTube. I didn't realize he was in Canada. He looks like he's like somewhere, his skin, not trying to be racist, but he looks like he's from India or somewhere in that region, Bangladesh. I don't know. It's probably India. Okay, I'm not trying to be racist, but that's what he looks like to me, okay? Caucasian, middle-aged men such as myself are not allowed to identify anyone outside of my race, or I'm seen as racist, but guess what? You can go fuck yourself. Anyway, he is making, he's been on YouTube for a long time. 48% of his audience, he looked at his demographics on YouTube, 48% of his audience is in the United States, according to YouTube. So he would be completely screwed if Bill C-11 came about. Because basically they're gonna make you, people like him, Subordinary Gamer, who's basically has half of his audience is from the U.S. He won't be able to get discovered anywhere, at least not in Canada. And it could affect his listings on YouTube for everybody. Who knows? You start messing with shit like that, and who knows what deal they make with YouTube. The Canadian government's going to be working behind the scenes with YouTube. We don't know what deals they're making. But as far as it goes in Canada, he wouldn't be seen at all. And who knows how that'll affect him in the United States once you start messing around with this stuff, discoverability. The last item in this section, how Bill C-11 will affect small and digital first Canadian creators. Here's this last section. Prove you're Canadian enough or watch your views drop. Bill C-11 established a two-tier system of Canadian creators. Hold on a second here. For Canadian creators, those who find algorithmically manipulating content to be categorized as CanCon will mean that creators who don't meet CanCon requirements will be pushed down on feeds, while those that do meet the requirements will be prioritized. So you will be if you have good government approved canned content, at least from what I'm understanding in Canada, you'll be up at the top. But we do not know what, if this bill were to pass, what's that going to do to Canadian independent creators in the United States or all over the world. There's a lot of independent Canadian creators that have big U.S. audiences. And Bill C-11 Every single independent creator should be talking about this and preventing it from passing. I actually found a guy who's a independent creator. He was the only person accepted, similar to what they do in the U.S., where they have you come talk to Congress and they have their little interviews. Well, this one independent creator, that was the only one they picked, and then they had like more like corporate-centric type people. And he actually went to the House, I guess, in Canada and spoke with the politicians about how disastrous this bill would be. I'll try to find that video and get it in this stream, but I don't want to make this a long stream because I really want to test this Odyssey live stream, so I'm just going to do a little bit more. So there's this article. I need a good video to play. Give me a second. I might be able to find. Might be able to find. If I go C-11 and SnoozeTube history. Here we go. So I found it. So you know what? I'm going to do this video for this guy that he's Canadian and he went to wonderful Trudeau's sponsored government and criticized Bill C-11, and I'll just end the stream with that. I think that's the best thing to do here. So I'm going to do a new tab to the right.
YouTube has their own sort of system of that. If government gets involved...
All right, so I'm not going to do the whole video. It's 28 minutes. I'm going to start in the beginning to give you an idea who this guy is. And then we'll find some excerpts from when he's, I guess, talking to politicians in the House.
Hello, friends. So, as you could tell from that fancy intro, I am in Ottawa right now because I have been summoned to testify at a parliamentary committee of the House of Commons. Specifically, I have been asked to offer my thoughts on Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act. This is essentially a bunch of amendments to the Canadian Broadcasting Act that would put digital media platforms like YouTube under the authority of Canada's federal media regulators, namely the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. I've been very critical of this proposed legislation in my capacity as a political commentator. Longtime viewers of this channel may recall that I made a couple of videos last year opposing Bill C-10, which was the previous version of this legislation that then died when Prime Minister Trudeau called an election in late 2021. Bill C-11 is thus the successor to Bill C-10 and shares many of the same fundamental problems. But before we get into that, let me just tell you a little bit about how the Canadian parliamentary legislative process works, so you perhaps understand a bit more clearly why I'm here doing what I'm about to do. So this fancy building is of course the Canadian Parliament, and all Canadian laws start here in the House of Commons. So the way it works is that a member of the Prime Minister's cabinet introduces a bill to the Parliament in what is called the first reading. If the Parliament votes to proceed, that bill is then sent to a committee where it can be debated in detail by a smaller group of politicians and likely amended several times before being sent back to the full Parliament for a final up or down vote. And
all right, so I don't think he talks about... I don't know if Trudeau has to approve it after the Senate passes. Maybe not.
during the committee process, the members can solicit the expert testimony of witnesses who may have unique insights into the particular flaws or virtues of the bill. Since the Government of Canada does a lot of stuff these days, there are a lot of different committees, and they're all very specialized. Bill C-11 involves internet regulation, so it was sent to the Committee on Canadian Heritage, which generally discusses bills relating to the media. Now, who gets to sit on a committee, you ask? Well, they are comprised of members of Parliament in in approximate proportion to their standing in the elected part of the Parliament, the House of Commons. So the Heritage Committee has 12 members, 6 Liberals, 4 Conservatives, and 2 from the other parties. The witnesses who are called to testify at a committee are also generally picked in proportion to the partisan makeup of the committee. So in this case, the Liberals got to call the most, whereas the Conservatives got to call me. Now, unfortunately, the committee hearings do not take place in the Parliament buildings themselves, but rather in these generic office buildings that are scattered around Ottawa. I'm not supposed to film inside of the building, so I guess the next thing you will see will actually be the hearing itself, so wish me luck. Alright, now I have to say that initially my plan for this video was to do a relatively lighthearted look at how laws are made in Canada, but having now gone through the process, I have to say that it was a fair bit more dispiriting than I anticipated, and quite a revealing glimpse of the power of special interests in Canadian politics. So in theory, a committee hearing allows the politicians to hear the testimony of people with more specific knowledge of the subject matter of the bill than they do. This allows the politicians to solicit insight and knowledge that can make the bill better or highlight unanticipated issues with it. However, I think it has become common practice for politicians to only invite witnesses who tell them what they want to hear and reinforce conclusions that they have already drawn long in advance.
Which is why more people, as many people as we can get, not just in Canada, but in the United States, you need to get in front of these, in front of the House of Commons, or the house on the little hill here in the United States, and get involved. If you don't ask, you won't receive. And I think if enough people did it, yes, it would sway things. I mean, some people are pretty pessimistic. They don't think anything's going to change. But if you don't get involved, what happens is you get controlled. We need less laws. We need to get, more. We need to just destroy these laws and create a simpler system. So it's commendable what this guy did, but he was the only one. There should have been more people that wanted to engage and were able to. The system is getting, both the United States and Canada is getting more and more corrupt by the day, and people need to get involved. I'm trying to do this for cryptocurrency, crypto regulation, make sure that there is no crypto regulation. If there is some kind of regulation, that it is very tame. Charles Hoskinson, the guy who created Cardano, he is trying to work with the government to make sure that they don't overregulate and destroy the innovation that's needed. I mean, all innovation would be destroyed if it were overregulated. And this bill C-11 has extreme ramifications for anybody. Online, there are so many people in Canada and the U.S. that are making money online, at least some kind of money, whether through SnoozeTube, YouTube, or what have you. And nowadays online, you basically, I mean, unless you want to just stay local, but even if you want to get known locally or regionally in your area, people are doing it online. That's the most efficient way to do it. So this bill C-11 is destroying jobs. It's destroying revenue for these independent creators. I'm going to do a little bit of where this guy is actually getting interviewed in the House, and then I'm going to end the stream, and then I'm going to have to figure out how I can go archive the Odyssey live stream that I'm doing right now, which I need to verify that is working. Black screen office. All right, so let's just start. We can actually, what is this here? Mandatory Canadian content quotas. Let's just start a little bit before there, and we'll do like maybe 10 minutes or something.
Television is a very high-cost industry. As a result, they are always looking for help from the government to keep their businesses afloat, and in exchange, government regulates them in order to have some say over what they air or what kind of programming they finance in order to serve some sort of larger patriotic greater good, which is where you get things like mandatory quotas for Canadian content on Canadian TV. The Quebec Media Guild represented the interests of the French Canadians. The French Canadians feel that their culture is uniquely important as a distinct community that only exists in Canada, and that therefore the Canadian government has a unique obligation to go out of its way to ensure that their cultural distinctiveness is preserved, including in the media. The Friends of Canadian Broadcasting basically represents the anti-American faction. As the only network that is run directly by the government, the CBC is often imagined to be the most direct bulwark of resistance to US media, and is thus very popular with the sort of people who fret a lot about the supposed Americanization of Canada. The CBC makes Canada's most overtly patriotic programming. The consumer advocacy guy, who frankly felt like a bit of an afterthought, represented the interests of ordinary Canadian media consumers, who of course the politicians all want to be seen as caring about. And the woman from the Black advocacy group, of course, represents modern political sensitivities about the importance of not having all public policy made entirely by a bunch of out-of-touch white people. And then there was me. Now, I am not naive. I understand what I represented. I was invited by the Conservative Party to embarrass the government. They knew I was critical of this bill and wanted me to poke some holes in it because it was in their partisan interest to do so. And then there was I was also a representative. I am not naive. New media, digital creators, which, as I said, is the community that I do believe has the most to lose from Bill C-11. So after opening statements, the politicians got to ask questions of the witnesses. And again, without putting too fine of a point on it, these were all generally softballs in which the politicians asked people who they knew would agree with them, why they agreed with them in various ways.
How do we ensure that we aren't a branch plant for cultural economy, rip it and ship it based economy that Canadians benefit but industry retains its value?
And then the Conservatives asked softballs to me that got me to harshly criticize a bill that they were already opposed to.
You know, when we hear some of this rhetoric, I do think it disturbs some people. You know, when we hear stuff about how we have to protect ourselves from foreign domination and we have to maintain our cultural sovereignty, the idea that, you know, Canadian culture is this like fragile thing that like the evil foreigners are going to corrupt and sort of erode us. You know, that to me is the kind of rhetoric you associate with like Viktor Orban's Hungary or something, right? And I don't think that a progressive democratic country like Canada wants to set the roadmap to regulating the internet that can then be adopted by the Viktor Orbans of the world. You know, because what's to prevent an authoritarian government from sort of saying like, well, we want to protect our cultural sovereignty too, and that's why we need to regulate YouTube and make sure that only good patriotic, you know, content is seen, and we'll, you know, play around with the algorithm to ensure that only the sort of patriotic content that we believe our people should see will get boosted in their feeds and their subscriber counts and all that kind of stuff. This is a real sort of old-fashioned way of thinking about Canada and thinking about Canadian culture that I personally do not have a lot of time for, and I think is increasingly just a very dated premise of thinking about culture that most YouTubers just do not conceptualize in the same way. Like, they don't think I'm making content in order to preserve some fragile idea of Canadian sovereignty. They think I'm making a cooking video, I'm making a fitness tutorial, I'm making a DIY video. You know, I make videos that are about specifically Canadian stuff, but there's tons of Canadian YouTubers who have been successful by just making the kind of content that they think there's an audience for. Sometimes that audience is Canadian, sometimes that audience is international. But you know, Canadians, I don't know, we're a very diverse people and we've got a lot of different interests. And I think that the great thing about YouTube and new media is that it allows Canadians to create the kind of content they want for a market that they believe exists. They sink or swim based on the popularity of that. And it's true what one of the other fellows said, which is that, you know, there are a lot of failed Canadian YouTubers. There's a lot of failed Canadian actors. Nobody is guaranteed success in the cultural realm. But I just think that YouTube is a marvelous case study of how you can be an independent Canadian content creator and achieve, you know, wealth and success and fame and all of the sorts of things that creatives want, you know, without government regulation, without subsidies, without mandates.
So that's the basics of it. I put it in the chat, the full video for this guy. I went to Parliament to save Canadian YouTube Bill C-11. Interesting. So I didn't know that he had gone and done this. I was doing research on C-11, and I found this once I started searching for stuff about C-11. So the algorithm brought it up, the YouTube algorithm. I'm going to end the stream and see if I can get this uploaded and finalized on Odyssey. Because I am Odyssey challenged at the moment with live streaming. Also, if there's anybody in the chat, I'm going to post the Odyssey channel for Variant News. If you would be so kind to... if you could send me some library tokens, I would be greatly appreciated on Odyssey. I'm actually going to post the channel URL for Variant News right here on Odyssey. We need LBRY tokens, or I guess it goes by LBC on the exchanges. And I'm just going to finish this up here. I've got my keyboard in all caps, and that's annoying. All right, I posted that in the chat. It's ampersand variant-news:4, but the URL's in the chat. If you could be so kind as to send us some library tokens, that would help us out moving forward on streaming on Odyssey. I'm not sure if I needed to be above the 50 mark or not, but regardless, I need the library tokens when I am going live or I'm uploading a video, because I need to promote the video with library tokens. So that's greatly appreciated if Variant News community could support us with library tokens. And with that, I'm going to end the stream. I'll have updates on Bill C-11. I'll be following it. I'm still not sure what's going to happen if the Senate passes Bill C-11 in Canada, if there's any other type of process that has to happen to make it into law. But logistically, it will be an absolute nightmare for everyone involved. A part of me wants to believe that it won't pass, but another part of me feels like with the way things are going in the Canadian government under Skater Boy Trudeau, anything can happen. So people need to be aware of this bill, especially if you live in Canada. And, you know, at the very least, have an opinion about it. I don't know. Maybe this is something the Canadians want. Maybe... Well, let me know. If you are Canadian, just let me know. What the hell do you think of Bill C-11? I'm ending the stream with that. Take care, and see you on the flip side. And I'm going to the outro now. I was just testing a scene here, and it absolutely looks horrible. But here we go. I'm ending the stream. Thanks, everybody. Take care. See you on the flip side, and don't do anything I would do.
My message is that